All right, my Bible in 365 brothers and sisters, we have arrived at the incredibly tragic book of 2 Kings. And folks, this book is filled with tragedy for so many reasons. But before we get to those reasons, I have to give you some background and some facts that will help you better understand where I'm coming from. And there are some basics that I do want to discuss. Now, first and foremost, there is a good amount of debate as into who actually wrote the book of 2 Kings. A lot of us believed that it was very likely Jeremiah who wrote all of it, if not most of it. I kind of think he likely wrote all of it. But there are some people who actually say that Jeremiah wrote the first portion of it. And then, of course, the last couple of chapters would have been written a little bit later by a group of prophets or other prophets. I happen to think that Jeremiah probably did it all. I do ascribe to the idea that a portion of it was written before 586 BC, and then later on in around 560 or 550, the rest of it was written. Now, there's a lot of debate that goes into, then, of course, if you believe that, how do you say it's Jeremiah? And that's a discussion for a later time. But the reason why it's important to note this is because what we read in the book of 2 Kings really is a notation of a kingdom that was really never even completely well documented, only because of the fact that God never allowed those chronicles to be found. And let me explain what I mean when I say that. When you go through the Old Testament, oftentimes you will hear references to two types of chronicles. You will hear things that say, well, this was written in the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah, which of course is where we get the term 1st and 2nd Chronicles from. Those are the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. And of course, there are times in the Bible where you will hear it say, you can read about it in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. And guess what? There are no Chronicles of the Kings of Israel in our possession because those books were lost. Now, it is my belief, as well as the belief of many others, that the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel were lost because God did not want to see the documentation or allow people to see the documentation of such a tragic portion of Israel's history. Now, I will say this, God still allowed us to see it because he wants us to be able to understand the effects of what happens when people rebel against the Lord. But I do think that God just wanted us to have just enough so that we could gain a better picture. And of course, so much of what we read about concerning the northern kingdom and the kings of the northern kingdom, we find actually in the chronicles of the southern kingdom, and of course, the kings or the writings of the kings that we read about in 2 Kings. Now, all of this is really important because that's going to bring me into helping you to understand why this book is so incredibly tragic, okay? Let's go first and foremost to 2 Kings chapter 17, and I'm going to read verses 22 and 23, and it says this. It says, "For the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which he did, and they did not depart from them, until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants, the prophets. So Israel was carried away from their own land to Assyria, as it is to this day." Now, I'm going to explain that because it's really important, but let me go over the second very tragic verse in 2 Kings, and it says this. This is 2 Kings chapter 23, and this is in verse 27, and it says this, "The Lord said, I will also remove Judah from my sight, as I have removed Israel, and will cast off the city of Jerusalem, which I have chosen, and the house of which I said, my name shall be there." And it's very tragic because 2 Kings provides for us the documentation of the end of or the destruction of both kingdoms. And it is so sad when you learn of these and you begin to understand and develop an awareness of what led to that situation and to those circumstances. Now, the one thing that I do want to point out, because I think it's really important, is helping you to understand the story of what actually took place and why things happened the way that they did. It starts off with the story of King Solomon, and of course, at around the time that King Solomon dies, he gives his kingdom to his son, Rehoboam, and Rehoboam is approached by a man by the name of Jeroboam, who leads a sort of little rebellion of about 10 tribes against the kingdom of Rehoboam. At this point, Israel is completely unified, but they stand divided over a disagreement regarding how badly Solomon had treated the people. Now, Jeroboam goes to Rehoboam and says, come on, cut us some slack. And of course, when Rehoboam didn't know what to do with that request, he went to the older, wiser advisors, the one who advised the most wisest king in the world. And he asked them, and they said, yeah, you better listen to him. Give him some slack. They'll be loyal to you. All will go well. Everything will be okay. And of course, he didn't listen. What he chose to do is take the advice of some really, really awful people who did not understand, because their immaturity actually led Jeroboam into a very, very dark direction. Now, the thing is this: Jeroboam was a wicked king. When the split between Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah took place, understand it was not a good one. Remember, prior to the split, okay, that is the very last king that ruled the nation of Israel as a whole would have been Rehoboam. Prior to the split, when you said Israel, it referred to all the tribes of the nation. After the split, when you referred to the kingdom of Israel, it was oftentimes referred to as the northern kingdom of Israel. So if you heard the term Israel, it meant the northern tribes or the 10 tribes of the north. And of course, when you heard the term Judah being used, then it would be oftentimes referring to the southern kingdom. So those are some very important distinctions. Now, I should talk about the fact that Jeroboam was a uniquely wicked and dark man who had a lot of things in his mind to do in order to lead the people astray for the purpose of developing his political prowess and kind of keeping this rebellion together. And he did it quite effectively. As a matter of fact, the devil has used this tactic for many, 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 many years. And this is why the insatiable lust and desire for abortion exists in the black community. It's for the same reason that Jeroboam did what he did and what's going on now with the black minister. I'll explain this in just a second. Well, let me just explain it right now. Let me just simply say this. Jeroboam knew for a fact that if people in the northern kingdom would go to the temple like they're supposed to, which was located in the southern kingdom 3 times a year, their heart would be given to the God of heaven. They would want to go live nearby or be reminded of the things of God, and their hearts would turn towards God, and they would not be sympathetic towards the cause of the north. So what did Jeroboam do? Jeroboam decided to build these false temples, and then he took the priests from the southern kingdom and he hired them to actually rule over these temples that were all over the north, and basically knew that if the people saw that, they recognized their own priests that they were familiar with leading the charge into the worship of false gods, then they themselves would do the same exact thing. So Jeroboam was successful in this, and he led the people astray. By the way, we are seeing this tactic being deployed today. And when I talk about this, let me just explain what I mean when I say this. Let's hit the fast forward button to Margaret Sanger. And let's talk about her for just 1 second, because this is a very, very important point to bring up. And it's a very good demonstration of how Satan's tactics never, ever, ever go away. He does the same thing time and time again, and he's done it throughout the tenure of human history. But here's the story. Margaret Sanger, who's the founder of Planned Parenthood, founded Planned Parenthood for the sole purpose of the elimination of the black race. But she knew that she would not be able to get black mothers to abort their babies if there were strong families, number one, and number two, if the spiritual leaders were not on their side. So what did she do? She started a project called the Negro Project, and she pretty much brought into play pastors who would lead their flocks astray into this sexual revolution, for what you would want to call it. And in essence, it is the black minister today that stands behind so much of the support for abortion as we see it in the modern day. Raphael Warnock is a great example of this. And of course, the Negro Project is nothing other than what we saw Jeroboam doing back in that day, and it's absolutely tragic. By the way, a couple of things to show you how sad it is when a nation chooses to forsake God. I want to read some names because this is like really interesting, because this is like a really, really important fact, okay? Let me read these names to you, and I want to do it on purpose to demonstrate a point, okay? We're talking about a 210-year history of the Northern Kingdom. So over 210 years, there were all but one of the 19 dynasties were created. I'll get into that in a second. I'll bring that up in just 1 second. But let me read these names to you. Okay, here it is. Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri, Omri, Ahab, Ahaziah, Joram, Yehu, Jehoahaz, Joash, Jeroboam II, Zechariah, Shalom, Menahem, Pechiah, Pekah, and Hoshea. Okay, now I am reading to you kings that represent 19 different dynasties. And let me bring up a point about these dynasties, okay? Of these 210 years that I've talked about where the Northern Kingdom exists, and by the way, 2 Kings lines all of this up for us, right? Every single one of these kingdom dynasties in the Northern Kingdom were created by murdering the previous king, with the exception of one of those dynasties. And that dynasty was the one that I'm talking about that started at the very beginning. So everyone after that was created by murder. It's terrible. And every single king of the Northern Kingdom was an ungodly and unrighteous king. And that is, of course, the same reason why the Northern Kingdom ended only after 210 years. Very, very sad when you think about it, right? Now, the Southern Kingdom lasted for, I would say, almost another 200 years. But if you think about it and you examine this, let me read some of these names of these Southern Kingdom names. Let me read them to you, because this is going to point something out, okay? Now, mind you, the names that I just read to you earlier were the Northern Kingdom kings. And those kings, by the way, all came from different families, okay? Different dynasties, all of them. But let me read these names, okay? You have Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Joram, Ahaziah, Athaliah, Joash, Amaziah, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Amon, Josiah. Josiah, I like that name. I really like Josiah. Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and of course, Zedekiah. Now, when you look at the name of all of these kings, okay, you have to understand this. They all came from one dynasty. That's the dynasty of King David, which of course is the line where Christ comes from. And by the way, 8 of those 20 kings actually had reasonable character. Okay, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Joash, Amaziah, Uzziah, Jotham, Hezekiah, Josiah. As a matter of fact, it's interesting, when Uzziah died, Isaiah was just terrified. Not terrified, he was heartbroken by that death. All of this to say that 2 Kings is tragic, because 2 Kings shows us such an extraordinary picture of what happens when the nation takes their eyes off God, and the people who follow them take their eyes off the Lord, and the people who lead them take their eyes off the Lord. It's sad. These nations didn't have to be destroyed, but they were. When you read 2 Kings, and by the way, 2 Kings is so much more rich on so many more levels. Like, for example, if you just look at 2 Kings 25, which in my opinion is one of the key chapters, right? The last chapter of 2 Kings records the destruction of Jerusalem. It's such a tragic, tragic moment. This would have been the moment that we know about in 586 BC. Absolutely tragic moment. And when we think it through to its completion, you recognize it literally goes back to the same exact problem. And the problem is they chose to deny the true and living God. And the story is sad, and the story is tragic, and there's so much that we know about what happened there that really can remind us effectively of how important it is to stay close to the Lord. I can't help but to bring all this stuff out, thinking about the nation right now that we're in that has fallen, and it has fallen immensely and quickly. How important it is for us to keep our eyes on the true and living God. That's the only hope we have. Well, there you have it, guys. It's a good book. Get into it. It's tragic, but it serves as an incredible reminder of what's important. God bless you.